Welcome back to the Upside Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Finkelstein, and this week's guest is Chris Herren. Many people know Chris Herren's story at this point. He's been one of the nation's foremost speakers and educators on addiction over the course of the last 10 years or so. Chris was a storied high school basketball player from 1990 to 1994 at Durfee High School in Fall River, Massachusetts. He was a McDonald's All-American. He had scholarship offers from the likes of Kentucky and Duke, but turned them down to attend his local school, Boston College. He was there for a year before transferring to Fresno State, played in the NBA, including another hometown stop for the Boston Celtics, and then had a long career overseas. Throughout virtually that entire playing career, he battled addiction to various substances. But he's been drug and alcohol free since 2008 and is not only one of the nation's foremost speakers and advocates, but has developed a series of organizations, three. Herren Talks is the one that features him as a speaker that most people are probably most aware of, but he also has the Herren Project, which is a nonprofit organization which has helped fund now close to 10,000 people get treatment in recent years, which is just incredible. And most recently, Herren Wellness, which is a residential substance abuse health and wellness organization with 2 locations in Massachusetts and 1 in Virginia. So it is really a comprehensive and holistic approach to fighting addiction and the stigmas that go along with it. I thought this was a incredibly important time to have Chris on, as we are now, at least in New England, where I record this, in our 7th week of social distancing, and it's a hard time for a lot of people. So I hope that Chris's words and his advice will provide resources and helpful hints even for anyone listening, and as we all continue to do our best to get through this time. So without further ado, here is Chris Herren. We would like to welcome Chris Herren to the podcast. Chris, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope this finds you and your family and everyone under your care safe and healthy.
Yeah, thank you for having me. First and foremost, it's it's trying times, and we're blessed as a family to be healthy. I haven't had anybody really close to me suffer from COVID.
Yep.
But as a guy in a business owner in my space of recovery and wellness, I have 38 people living under one roof on one campus, all suffering from substance use disorder, and
right.
so it's like 2 different worlds, right? I mean, I go home and I go to supermarkets and everybody's social distancing and wearing masks. And then I drive on to my campus and, everybody's close and together and sitting next to each other. And because they've been quarantined now for 6.5 weeks.
And that's the Herren Wellness program that you're referring to, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, but you have two locations in Massachusetts and 1 in Virginia now?
Yeah, two in Mass, 1 in Virginia. And that, yes, I'm referring to Herren Wellness. I've been open now for 2 years, and it's interesting. It's they really don't understand what it's like, outside of that campus right now. They have no idea what people are going through. We try to remind them how blessed they are to have a community, to have people, to
right.
be, to have access to other people other than their family. And it's a trying time, but for them, it's, there's a silver lining in it as well.
Well, that's, there's so many different avenues that I would like to explore with you, but I think that the times, if you don't mind, I'd kind of like to continue down this avenue of COVID-19 and the impacts on addiction and mental health, but also get your take specific to athletes and coaches. If you have any thoughts on, what this period of time I think there's been a lot of talk about athletes in particular,
mm-hmm.
but in my mind, like, college coaches is a group of people that I think I worry a lot about. I see a lot of quite frankly, functional alcoholics, if that's an appropriate term, in that line of work, and a lot of just very intense people that I think this is a really hard time for. So I don't mean to leave the question open-ended, but I wanted to kind of give you some freedom to share whatever your thoughts might be along those lines, whether it's for, athletes or coaches.
For me personally, in this business, and I hate to call it that, but that's what it is. It's the first 2 weeks of COVID, the phone wouldn't stop ringing for young adults between the age of 17 and 28. That was the first 2 weeks. The next 2.5, 3 weeks were older adult males, husbands, fathers, and then this past week and a half has been moms.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's been interesting to kind of dissect and look at and the data of incoming traffic and calls. I think moms initially were going to keep the house settled and everybody in place and be that anchor that their family needed. But after a month and a half, we've seen the call volume go up, increase significantly with mothers and wives. So, from a coach's perspective, from an athlete's perspective, staying busy, that's part of their routine. It's part of their schedule. I think they all have to kind of rewire a bit, and that's always difficult.
Right.
I think they are not used to being a stay-at-home dad, or husband. And likewise for their wives, they're not used to having them in the house 24/7.
100%.
But when family has eyes on you, when families are observing you and spending that much time on you, all of a sudden you see, the character defects, areas of their life that they might be struggling in. When things slow down, it's magnified, right? And, so, we've had at my place coaches, athletes, CEOs, attorneys, so on and so forth. But, now, now's a trying time for all, but especially for people who, have a routine and now are up against the wall a little bit. I mean, their recruiting schedule has changed. AAU in college basketball has stopped. So, there's a lot of decisions to be made. And unfortunately, for coaches, especially on the collegiate level, a lot of those decisions are out of their control.
One of the things I noticed in preparing for this interview when I was researching Herren Wellness along with Herren Talks and Herren Project and all the different initiatives that you're working on, the holistic approach at Herren Wellness, it struck me as something that would be beneficial to people, especially in times like these, whether they are guests at your and if my terminology is incorrect, please correct me, but whether they're guests at your facilities or not. I was struck by the fitness, the mindfulness, the family engagement. Those seem to be three of the pillars that I saw most notably promoted on the website. And it just struck me as like, hey, these are things that everybody can be doing right now. If you have to kind of redefine your day, that everybody could do to just kind of help their own personal mental health, regardless of what they're dealing with. Is that something you could speak to, or maybe even why that's such a prominent part of your program, and if that's unique to programs like yours?
I mean, I would like to say it's unique. I think the treatment industry, substance use, alcoholism, I think they've gotten away with just throwing a big book at people and circling chairs and having group talk therapy, which I think is unbelievably beneficial. But if I was going to get into this, I was going to go all in, and yoga and meditation and mindfulness and personal training and nutrition and acupuncture and massage therapy. I wanted to give people as many avenues to success and sustainable long-term recovery as possible. Not everybody finds, emotional wellness in Alcoholics Anonymous. I do, but but that doesn't have to be everybody's track. And so for me, I wanted to kind of lay the tracks, multiple avenues to support their recovery. Acupuncture, massage therapy, from yoga and meditation, guided meditation. I think those are all very strong resources to, sustaining, a positive outlook and a strong mental health outlook. We provide those resources because we've seen the success. And for us, we're a long-term center. We're a long-term campus. I believe that, 20 years of drinking is not really going to be fixed in 30 days.
Right.
It takes a while to recover. It takes a while to heal. And, providing those resources are practices that they can carry with them. For me, as a man in recovery and coming up on 12 years, these are all exercises and behavior that I've instituted into my recovery program. So for me, it was a no-brainer to offer it to the people at Herren Wellness.
I wanted to ask you about that, if you don't mind, to ask you if you had a personal, meditative practice. It's something that it's one of those things that I think I'll go back to college coaches. I think the general public would be shocked to know how many college coaches have, well, maybe they wouldn't be shocked, but there's tons of college coaches that I know that have really bought in to a daily meditative practice, because so many of these guys are so intense, and they've found this to be something that helps to relax them, give them perspective, whatever the case may be. But I've noticed over the last couple of years in particular the amount of coaches who not only have a meditative practice, but who are willing to openly talk about it. Because there used to be like a stigma to it, I think, unfortunately, but I think that's going away. So I was just curious if you had a personal meditative practice.
Yeah, no, I do every morning and every night. And prayer is a big part of my program, right? I'm a huge spiritual person. I believe in it. I believe in the benefits that it's given me in my life. So prayer, meditation, exercise, proper nutrition, and there's no perfection in this, right? Like even though I'm coming up on 12 years sober, I'm not away from this. And as a former athlete, it was very important for me to have a structured recovery program, a structured wellness program. I tell the people in my center all the time, I could lock myself in a gym for 3 hours and shoot at a little rim. But, so why can't I for 15 minutes a day meditate? Why can't I do 20 minutes of yoga, or, jump on a bike and cycle, or do something that's going to benefit me personally and benefit my mental health? Because, ultimately, I removed drugs and alcohol from my life. But that doesn't mean, I'm going to be healthy for the rest of my life. Right. That doesn't mean that my mental health will never suffer again. I'm in constant vigilance of sustaining a healthy mindset, because once I disconnect from that, once I struggle with that and my mindset becomes toxic, that's when I go back to alcohol. That's when I go back to drugs.
And I think that even for people who there's a lesson to be learned there, even for people who don't struggle with addiction, or who, perhaps more accurately said, have not yet struggled with addiction. I think to be vigilant of their mental health, especially in times like these, which are more stressful for quite a lot of people. I'm curious, again, please correct me if I'm wrong, but you were playing professionally in China during the SARS outbreak.
I was.
Is that right?
Yes, correct.
Does that give you some unique perspective on COVID-19 and a pandemic, or does that change your perspective or inform your perspective at all?
You know, it's interesting. I was on an enormous amount of heroin in China, right? And as well as hash. I was extremely sick when I was playing basketball in China. But I had teammates who are unbelievable men on my team, and they downplayed it. So we traveled without masks. We flew without masks. We were on trains without masks. We went to restaurants during the SARS virus without masks. I didn't have this much, when I was in China during the SARS virus, it didn't look like it does today here with COVID. Does it change my perspective? This isn't just about me anymore, right? I have 38 people. Sure. I have 38 people I'm responsible for, whose family members dropped them off at my center and said, please help my family. So I'm definitely more vigilant and aware of what COVID can do to not only to a person, but to a whole community. So, we have very strict guidelines, and, the guests there, like I mentioned earlier, they've been quarantined for 6.5 weeks.
Right.
But recovery and mental health, especially recovery, it's all about perspective, right? And, we can sit there and say, for me with Corona, I do 250 speaking events a year. I'm gone Monday through Thursday night every week. I have three children, so for me, Corona has given me an opportunity to reconnect with my family. My son, my son who had a trying year, who is transferring. I got to walk through that process with him and be present for him and support him through this whole process. So, from a lot of aspects, Corona has helped me in many ways, and that's the perspective I choose to look. I choose to take.
Well, I read that you and you spoke about that even specific to your recovery. I know you're taking it from a family perspective right now, which I think is something that people can relate to. But I read that you said Corona has strengthened your recovery as well. Is that right?
It has, because it's made me, again, Corona, it's kind of slowed the world down. And
absolutely.
And anybody who's fragile, and I put myself in that category as fragile. I'm living in recovery, and I'm never completely healed. And so I consider myself fragile, but anybody who's fragile and the world slows down and now you have to sit with self, different emotions kick up, different memories. And it's not easy. So, we've had to implement, technology, for instance, around recovery, right? I mean, it's such a huge asset for us to be able to text, to pick up the phone, to FaceTime, to Zoom. So I think there's a lot of benefits that will come out of this. I think there's a lot of people, especially at my center, that, they've learned new techniques and practices how to stay sober. They've doubled down on meditation. They've doubled down on yoga and fitness and nutrition. They're doing Zoom meetings, which they've never done before. And now, when they go back home and they can't get to a meeting, they log in and do a virtual meeting, which is phenomenal.
There's got to be some challenges with that, I would assume, in terms of what's the word I'm looking for people who aren't at a facility when it comes to privacy. I mean, there's got to be. My wife works my wife's an MSW who works in the substance abuse field, and I know she's spoken about how the technology is an asset, but it's also a challenge when you need to maintain privacy and confidentiality and things like that. That's a hurdle that they've had to overcome, at least relative to her experiences. And I don't mean to go off on a tangent. It just made me think of that when you mentioned the technology.
Of course. And listen, we have plenty of high profile people come through my program, that go on Zoom meetings and just blank out the screen,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there you go.
They're listening, right? And unfortunately, they don't have that face-to-face, and they're just not ready to disclose and be fully transparent and let people into to their life and their world. But, there's other coaches, too, that have created, I've helped create different Zoom meetings for people who are worried about their anonymity.
That's great.
And connecting people who have a high profile that, feel comfortable logging into a group of other people who have high profile positions or personalities.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So, you lose the connection, right? But if someone's afraid of their anonymity in a Zoom meeting, they're definitely afraid of their anonymity in an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting at a local church.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So I think the Zoom meeting has almost given them more opportunity in a lot of ways.
Interesting. Well, that's good. That's great. I hope that's the case. I had one other thing too. I did want to wrap up by asking you about your speaking career, but I had one other question as it relates to this current situation. I was just, again, curious to get your thoughts on package stores being considered essential businesses in a lot of places, but addiction and mental health centers not being. So I was just, I not looking for a hot take in any way, shape, or form. I didn't mean to surprise you with this, but it just, some of this stuff, when you see what businesses are essential and what businesses aren't, it can just be head scratching at times. And I wasn't sure if there was a logical reason behind it.
Well, I think a lot of people would die.
That's because of withdrawal. That's what I was.
Yeah, I mean, I know my dad would be in trouble. My father would be in trouble if he didn't have access to a liquor store. Unfortunately, it's essential. I think what it's done is, for me, my perspective, it shows you how sick it can be. How sick and suffering people truly are, that we have to keep liquor stores open or people are going to pass away. And
that's literally from because I just want to clarify this for the readers. You could speak to this better than me. That's literally for people who will have physical symptoms if they were forced to stop drinking from withdrawal. Is that right?
Well, if you go to any detox center in America, the nurses station, the closest people to the nurses stations are people who take Xanax, Valiums, or alcohol. They're at greatest risk for fatalities. They will suffer from seizures. Heroin, crack cocaine. You can put them way in the back, and they're going to be really sick and have physical withdrawals, but they're not going to pass away. They're not going to die from it. Alcoholism, barbiturates, Xanax, Valiums, those drugs, they have an effect on people where they can have seizures. And my dad, who I love dearly, he would be one that would be at severe risk of losing his life if liquor stores closed. So I see both perspectives. Right. It's part of me wants to say they're non-essential, but then for the people who are sick and suffering from this illness, they need access to it.
Because there is a rational argument to be made for it. I think that's a perspective that most people, if they're not aware of the intricacies of the illness, addiction, that is, probably wouldn't have, myself included.
Sure.
Wouldn't have realized. If you don't mind, I'd like to shift focus a little bit just to your speaking career, if you still got a couple of minutes.
Of course.
I've heard you say recently that you're not focusing as much on your personal story anymore, but more on prevention and education.
Right.
Why the shift?
Because I think for years, looking at this, this issue of substance use and the stigma attached to it, I think kids are, when it comes to prevention and education, we talk about the worst day and not the first day. We're going to tell kids that, you're going to lose your teeth and this is what you look like in a mugshot and you might overdose and die. We talk about how it ends rather than why it's beginning. And if we really want to prevent and educate, we have to talk about the cause in the beginning and the reasons why kids are starting to use. So, for me, telling my story, I would always get emails from high school kids and say, Chris, Mr. Herren, whatever, I'm praying for you and your family. I'm so happy that your life has turned around, but I never got their story. And once I changed it, once I tweaked it, I got their story, and they started asking for help, and they talked about their first day and where they're at. So, that's, for me, hopefully one day wellness will be a core class in our kids' school system. Hopefully, we'll take this serious enough to take the time to create a curriculum that, supports kids and supports, what they're going through, whether it's with themselves or their family members who are suffering from mental health or addiction. They have no resources. There is no space. Guidance counselors. I speak at high schools in America that have 2,000 kids, and there's 4 guidance counselors.
Right. Yeah, I've heard you speak about this. Yeah. And school therapists as well, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And not only that, like guidance counselors today, their job description is more of a college resource rather than emotional support. So they're juggling so many children in different aspects. They're overwhelmed, and it's too difficult. So, I'm a huge advocate for emotional, social wellness. I don't think we do it enough. I don't talk much about my athletics, but just as an example, as a McDonald's All-American, as a kid who was 16 and had a book written about him, playing in front of a lot of people at Durfee High School, I couldn't even be myself on Friday night with 10 of my best friends. You know what I mean? So that's a problem.
And you've talked about some of your friends have had similar experience. And correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm trying to. I'm not sure if this is the same group of people, but I read something about you said like 7 of your 15 best friends also became heroin addicts. Is that the same group, or am I misconnecting 2 stories? No,
that's the same group. And that's a low ball number. That was playing it safe. There's alcoholics in that mix. There's people who've suffered from cocaine addiction. We all suffered. We all had our battle. But it all began in the basement. It all began with a pony keg and our parents' liquor cabinet. And I think kids need to understand that, and I think they need to understand why they're doing it. Why can't you just be you on a Friday night? And like parents hover over homework, they yell on the sidelines at athletic games, but on Fridays and Saturday nights they're non-existent.
Right. Or I've heard you speak about as well the parents who know what's going on in the basement and are okay with it. And I think sometimes it's well, at least they're not drinking and driving. At least we know they're safe. But that safe is in the short term, not in the long term.
Absolutely, and especially being from the Northeast. If parents didn't open up our basement, we would have stayed home multiple weekends. Right. We would have refrained from drinking alcohol and doing drugs if we didn't have a warm basement to hang out in.
I grew up here too. I mean, everybody's got their stories of hanging out in somebody's basement. And absolutely.
And the thing is some make it out, some don't, right? But there's too much risk involved. So we've got to stop creating that space. And I think it's unfortunate. And listen, a 20-year-old son and an 18-year-old daughter, I could never imagine the girls that my daughter is friendly with, who I've known since they were 7 years old, hanging out in my basement, drinking tequila and beer on Friday nights while I'm upstairs on the couch with my wife.
Right.
That is like the
most. But that was the norm. I remember when I was growing up, that was the norm, because parents were, and I don't even know that it came from a malicious place. I think it was more like, well, at least we know they're not drinking and driving.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, but there's economies of, I don't know if economies of scale is the right way to do it, but it's like there's still a lot of risk here,
Huge risk. And you gotta, if you're the parent that provides it, just be prepared to see that kid 10 years down the line really suffering, and know that your basement played a part in it.
Yeah.
And back in the 80s and 90s, we know more today. I mean, drugs and alcohol, thankfully, is on the front page today. It's a relevant topic in politics, in business. You know, parents know much more about drugs and alcohol and the effects than they did in the 80s and 90s. And so, to me, there's no excuse anymore. You know, there's no excuse to open up your basement.
Chris, I know we're coming up on time here. Is there, and I want to make sure I gave you the forum to mention everything you wanted. Is there anything else you'd like to add to anybody listening, whether they're have addiction, whether they're just struggling mentally to get through this coronavirus? But are there any final thoughts from you to anyone listening? You
know, there's access to help, right? And the Herren Project, my foundation, is an unbelievable resource for people who are struggling. We do nightly meetings at 7:30, Zoom meetings. I was on the other night, and we had over 300 people.
Wow.
So there are plenty of resources. We have 1-800 numbers that people can reach out if they're struggling. We can identify centers for you to go to, and just be a resource for you. We also have family support groups. So if your loved one is struggling with drugs and alcohol, we have family support groups that are facilitated by licensed therapists and social workers. And then if you're the one, you know, that the mirror is kind of closing in on you, you know, you've been in the house for a month and a half and drugs and alcohol are starting to really wear on you, know that, you know, there's a better way, and there's plenty of people out there that would love to show you the way. But I appreciate the time. I really do. And I thank you for shedding some light on this topic.
No, thank you so much. I want to mention, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Herren Project, which you mentioned, is it 4,000 people now that you've funded and allowed to get in treatment on scholarship in the last 5 or 6 years?
You know, and I'm saying that I think it's around 8,000.
That's incredible.
And it's all because of Chris Mullen, to be quite honest, right? If Mully didn't reach out to me and his wife when I was in a hospital after overdosing at 32 years old and find me a place to go, you know, that inspired me. I wanted to be the person on the other end. I wanted to pick up the phone and say, you know, I can help you figure this out. And, you know, because of Mully, because of his wife, you know, now I've been able to do that, you know, close to 10,000 times and for 10,000 families. And it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, that's incredible work, and I can't thank you enough for making the time today. I hope this was, for anybody listening, I hope they were able to find some resources if they need it, find some perspective if they need it, and thank you so much for not just for making the time, but for all that you do.
Thanks, Adam. I appreciate it.
One more thank you to Chris Herren for joining us on the Upside podcast. As I said in the opener, Chris is someone that I've wanted to speak to for a long time. He has an incredible story and has done just absolutely incredible work over the course of the last 10 plus years. But I thought it was particularly timely right now, given these uncertain times and the heightened levels of stress that so many people are dealing with, whether they're battling addiction or not. So to everyone out there listening, I hope you got whatever you needed out of this. I hope maybe you learned something. I hope you found some resources. Hope you found something that you can do to ease your daily burden as we continue to go through social distancing. And to everyone out there, please just continue to stay safe and healthy. Until next time, I'm your host, Adam Finkelstein, and thanks so much for listening. So much for listening.